Good evening. My name is Bart Thurber, and I'm the Ann Hendricks Dast Director here at the Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center. As you can see, I don't have a microphone, so I'm told to project. So if anyone can't hear me, just tell me to speak up a little bit louder, because I can see we've got some people in the back there as well. As you can see, it's completely sold out this evening, so it's very much my pleasure to welcome all of you here. One of the things that we enjoy the most here at the Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center is partnering with all of the performing arts. As you might imagine, we have dance here, we have different improv actually. Music, I hate to say for those of you who are in dance or in the theater, but I have to say music is one of the favorite for myself here. The acoustics are wonderful, and we're very, very honored to have this evening's guest. Especially Raven Chacon, a brilliant artist and composer whose thought-provoking work crosses boundaries, indeed questions the very notion of boundaries to begin with. Not only did he just receive the Pulitzer Prize for music this year, he also currently has work on display at the Whitney Biennale on view through September 5th, so for those of you who haven't gone to see it yet, you have a few more days. His art is truly interdisciplinary, so it's appropriate that this program has so much support from several campus partners. To begin with, I want to thank Tom Pacio, Vassar's Director of Creative Arts and Institutional Grant Innovation, for his enthusiasm and support for bringing Raven to campus. Thank you also to Professors Molly McLennan, Mallory White Duck, for their support of the program and energy in promoting it across campus. Thank you to our co-sponsor, the J. Vincent Johnson Alana Cultural Center, and Nicole Beveridge for being such a great campus partner. And then thank you also to our co-sponsor, the Music Department, and especially to Christine Howlett, Associate Professor and Chair of Music and Director of Choral Activities. This is a true collaboration, and the event simply could not have happened without Christine's energy and initiative, and she's been here for every single rehearsal, so thank you very much, Christine. Thank you also to the musicians for bringing Raven's composition to life. Truly, we are deeply grateful. And finally, I want to give a shout out to our colleagues in Media Resources for their invaluable assistance this evening and for all of our events here. Now, just a brief introduction of John Murphy, our Curator of In Translation, Prints Across Media, who will introduce Raven. And John is really the instigator of all of this. From the exhibition, the choice of the print, and for bringing this all together. So thank you very much, John. He joined the Loeb almost a year ago as the Philip and Lynn Straus Curator for Prints and Drawings. From 2018 to 2021, he was the Hohen Curatorial Fellow for Prints at the University of San Diego, where he curated Storywork, The Prints of Marie Watt, a traveling retrospective co-organized with the Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation. He received his PhD from Northwestern University in 2017. Raven's lithograph, Horse Notations, visible here for the majority of you, is featured in John's first exhibition here at the Loeb, as I mentioned, In Translation, Prints Across Media, on view in the adjacent galleries until September 18th. This fall, he will be teaching a 6-week intensive course in the Department of Art, Paper Protest, Printmaking as Social Criticism. So thank you very much, John.
Thanks, Bart. So thank you all for being here. Can you hear me okay? Mic all right? Excellent. This is pretty much my first event at the Loeb. I think I'm ready to retire. It's just really exciting to have you all here. So thank you for being here. Huge honor to have Raven here as well. So it is my pleasure, my privilege to introduce Raven as an artist, performer, composer, all-around maker of sound from Fort Defiance, Navajo Nation. As a member of the Indigenous art collective Postcommodity, he co-created artworks presented at the Whitney Biennale, Documents at 14, and Carnegie International 57. His solo artworks are in the collection of the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Smithsonian, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and now the Loeb. And now we're honored to have Horse Notations here. His 3 incredibly beautiful and moving works are on display in the Biennale, on view through September 5th, so do rush out and go see it this weekend before it closes. As a composer, Chacon has exhibited, performed, or had works performed at the Renaissance Society, Site Santa Fe, and the Kennedy Center. And since 2004, he's mentored over 300 high school Native American composers in the writing of new string quartets for the Native American Composer Apprenticeship Project, or NACAP. And I'll be asking a little bit more about that program in a bit. His 2020 opera, Sweetland, co-composed with Duyon, was named Opera of the Year by the Music Critics Association of North America. His 2021 composition, Voiceless Mass, commissioned by Present Music in Wisconsin and composed for a pipe organ and large ensemble at the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist in Milwaukee, received the Pulitzer Prize for Music this year. And in his words, Raven wrote Voiceless Mass to consider the spaces in which we gather, the history of access of these spaces, and the land upon which these buildings sit, just as this building and campus sits on the homelands of the Munsee Lenape. So Raven, welcome to the Loeb. We're so honored and grateful to have you here.
Thanks. Thank you, John.
So just for a little bit of format, Raven and I are going to speak for probably about half an hour or so, and then there's going to be a bit of stage business as we bring out chairs and stands for the musicians. And then you'll hear horse notations. I think I can say it's the East Coast premiere of horse notations. Is that right,
Yeah.
Raven? All right, nice. The East Coast premiere of horse notations tonight in this building. And then Raven and I will get up again for a Q&A from the audience. So hold your questions. I'm sure you'll have many, and we'll look forward to hearing those. So Raven, I thought we would start with just a bit of background, how you got into art, music, early influences or experiences that kind of shaped you.
Yeah, I didn't get into art until maybe 10 years ago, really. I always consider myself a musician and composer, and I think I was given wrong information that to be a musician you had to notate, put it all as dots on paper. But I had taken piano lessons at a really young age in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The family had moved to Albuquerque after I had grown up on the reservation because they wanted to go to the university. And they had met a woman who was doing her grad studies at UNM. And so that's where my sister and I both took piano lessons for 3 years. And we had never seen her play music before in a concert. And one day she told my parents, she said, I'm finally gonna, I'm gonna be playing a concert, bring the kids. So we got dressed up. We went to the Keller Hall, which is the university concert hall. And every year they have it's called the Composer Symposium, UNM Composer Symposium. They bring composers, international composers, and my piano teacher comes out on stage wearing a bathrobe, carrying rubber duckies, throws them into the piano, the lid is open, and walks around to the keyboard and slams the lid shut. And I'm thinking, what the hell? What is that? What is this? This is crazy. And she does something else, plucks some strings, and then storms off. And I thought, wow, I thought it was a joke. Probably half the people in the audience also were laughing. And afterwards, she introduces us to the composer. She says, I want you to meet the man who wrote this piece. Me and my little sister, and shake his hand. And that was John Cage, who was visiting one of his last gigs, I think. It was maybe 1989 or so, was at that symposium. So I didn't think nothing of it. I didn't know who John Cage was until years later, going to the same university to study music. And, even a little bit before that, hearing that name and at least understanding what he did, or trying to understand, but also having a bit of a connection and saying, hey, I had met this guy before. He was a person who obviously has a sense of humor, but still trying to figure out what was that music?
Well, in some ways that leads to the second question, which is, and I'll also just put in a plug for In Translation, which has a John Cage piece in it, so go check that out. Not wanting to say anything about Marcel. But Cage, of course, is known for 4 minutes, 33 seconds, 4 minutes, 33 seconds of silence, essentially the person not sitting at the piano, not playing. And I was surprised and somewhat delighted to learn that it premiered in Woodstock, not too far from here, at the Maverick Theater, somewhat rustic theater out of doors. And Cage later said that he enjoyed hearing all the sounds of the rain pattering on the roof and the sounds of people's feet as they walked out. But could I just ask about silence, Raven? And this kind of bookends your career in a way. It's sort of your earliest work, field recordings from, I think, 1999, and then the work that's at the Whitney currently, Silent Choir. And I don't know, just those two works together and this idea of cage and silence, noise and silence, the relationship between those two. Could you just speak about silence?
Yeah, even though, you know, I was just talking about cage, I think even before that, it was, for me, there was a lot of experimentation in New Mexico that I was doing just because, a few factors. I mean, I didn't have anybody to play with. I didn't play very well, and so I made my own instruments. Maybe as a way so I didn't have to learn an instrument, I would just make an instrument, and then there was no history with that instrument, so so I could be the virtuoso of that instrument, I guess. And playing around with cassette tape and doing different kinds of experiments. We used to go and play concerts out in the desert because there was nowhere else to really do that, you know, so we'd get a generator and, you know, have some bands play out there and just gather out there. And I would go out there also and make, you know, make recordings and play my instruments out there for a few friends. And that became the site of just things happening for a group of us kind of teenagers. And so what I wanted to do was, or what I started doing, and I didn't realize this was a practice, was making recordings of places. And I think that early piece, it's called Field Recordings, had started just to see what would happen if I recorded at a quiet place at a quiet time of day. And thinking also about the places that I knew, the places on the Navajo reservation, places like Window Rock, Arizona, which is the capital of the reservation, but also a very sacred place. Canyon de Chelly, which is where I grew up before moving to Albuquerque. And then different places like the West Mesa of Albuquerque, the Sandia Mountains. And I don't know what I was expecting to hear just capturing these silent places. So I kept turning it up to maybe hear something that is or isn't there. And turning it up more and turning it up more. And then finally just cranked it to 11. And to try to magnify whatever was in there. And then I just left it. I said, oh, I like this. And I did the same to the, you know, the Sandia Mountains one and the Canyon de Chelly. And they all had these different colors to them. And I realized maybe this is what I want to listen to instead of straining my ears for the silence. So it wasn't anything to do with silence. I think it was more to magnify, to see if I could hear these places. Of course, later on, years later, I mean, still to this day, people, you know, they say, you know, oh, I can hear the landscape in your music or whatever. I used to get tired of that, but in fairness, I mean, it's hard to talk about music, so I've come to appreciate maybe thinking through what it is that we do here in people's music, you know, whether it's style or it's who they're playing with or where they are or the building that they recorded the thing in is all very interesting to me.
And then do you mind just saying a word about Silent Choir?
And so this, I hadn't even thought about this at the time either, that this work had come full circle. I made that field recordings piece in 1999, but in 2016, I was fortunate to be invited to the Standing Rock Reservation during the no DAPL pipeline protection of the land, the encroaching pipeline. By an artist from that area, Chinupahanska Lugar, who has collaborated with Marie Watt. He was going back, he lives in New Mexico, but he was going back and forth to Standing Rock to check in with his relatives and just see how he could help, defend that land and that water. And so I went with him on one of those trips. It was around the Thanksgiving weekend of that 2016 fall. And when I travel, I try to take a small recording device with me. Nothing fancy, no big mics or anything, just something I could put in my pocket, something the size of a cigarette, pack of cigarettes or something. And I had that on me the whole time I was there, which was about a week and a half. I mean, I didn't want to stick microphones in anybody's faces. There was plenty of that. There were documentary filmmakers and, journalists and Jane Fonda and everybody else who was out there. But I felt that not only was there important things happening, but I was curious as to what I would hear in retrospect, because there was so much happening that it was, for me, another set of years to recount this moment. Maybe there was other kinds of other things that I wouldn't understand at the time that I would be able to go back to and refer to and understand about that moment. And so what had happened was on Thanksgiving Day, and this was right after Trump was elected, so this was quite a time of anxiety and anger. The water protectors, who on Thanksgiving weekend had numbered to about 12,000 people in the encampment, had gathered at the base of this hill that was called Turtle Hill. And if they were to breach that hill, they would be able to get to where the pipeline was being constructed. And so I definitely had my recorder rolling during that time, and you hear, and I don't know what I'll do with this part yet, or this recording, but you hear all of that anger, you hear that frustration, you hear singing, you hear praying, you hear water protectors building a bridge to try to cross the creek so they could run up and storm the hill. You hear drones. You hear drones from the police, but then you hear drones from water protectors, counter drones, counter surveillance. You hear helicopters. You hear horses. And you hear screaming, a lot of yelling, a lot of anger. You hear a lot of different languages. There's so much information in even a minute of that recording. It's a bit even exhausting, but there's some beauty inside of that. 2 days later, after everybody couldn't yell at the police anymore, the eldest women of the camp had decided that they were going to go confront the DAPL security and the state police, who were gathering just north of the encampment on this bridge called Backwater Bridge. If some of you remember photos, you would see that the highway going up to, I think Bismarck, was barricaded off to prevent access. And so these eldest women of the camp, all from different tribes, walked on that bridge and just stared at the police and didn't say anything. And the rest, about another 500 water protectors behind those 20 or so women followed and did the same. And so what Silent Choir is a field recording. It's only about 2 minutes long. No, it's actually 10 minutes long, of nothing, just 600 people being absolutely quiet. And you can hear the shame of the police. And they wouldn't even look back. They just stared at the ground. And somehow, you feel the presence of all those bodies there, and some coughs, some sniffles, but ultimately you can feel the frustration and the anger and the resilience in that recording.
And since you used the word beauty, Raven, to describe some of what you heard in some of the recordings, I'm struck by a definition you gave of music as being finding instances of beauty to align up with other instances of beauty. And I'm just curious to hear what beauty sort of means for you, or how you think about beauty.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that, because art people really hate using the word beauty for some reason. But it's funny because musicians, you know, cringe when we hear harmony too, right? It's like we didn't mean for it to mean all this other stuff. Harmony to me does not mean resolution, you know. But when I had said that, I think I'd said that in an interview or something. What I was meaning was this concept, this Navajo concept of hojo, and that means, for lack of a better translation, beauty. But I think what I gather from what that word means, and what I've been told that means, is the universe showing you, reminding you that you exist and you're a part of it. These glimpses, it's not happening all the time. You get these glimpses of openings, perhaps, where you are seeing yourself inside of something that's bigger. And maybe that's because things are lining up. Or maybe you have an awareness of yourself in time as well, or time and place. I don't know if there's a way to describe this, but I'm sure you all have felt this reminder that you are a part of the world that you live in. And so, in myself thinking about maybe alignments of events happening that could do that for me, at least in a musical landscape, that is how I've started to think about my role as being some kind of organizer of music notes or sounds. Mm-hmm. And I'm interested in what that can do. If that has the power to induce any kind of experience, then that's the idea behind that. I mean, it's not a value judgment of dissonance or anything like that in music. It was more just to think about experiences that I appreciated in a durational timeline. And for me, that's music. I mean, I'm sure filmmakers might think of a way to organize what they do as well, or dancers, choreographers.
And then in terms of sort of transmitting that knowledge or that experience or that understanding of music to a younger generation, I know that's a big part of your practice, and has been, Raven, since I think 2004, as being a part of the Native American Composer Apprenticeship Project. And I don't know if this was related to that experience with Kneecap, that I think it's a track on your anthology of chants operations, but you described overhearing from another room students trying to play the recorder. So I was just wondering if you could speak about, does that have something to do a little bit with that kind of sense of yourself in space? And then if you didn't mind also sharing a little bit about that program as well.
Yeah, I'll begin by talking about the program, in that it's, the Kneecap program is a project that started 22 years ago, and it started as a education component of a larger event called the Grand Canyon Music Festival. So every fall, there's a series of concerts that happen there. In 2000, they decided, or became aware, that they should engage with the Native community whose lands are, where the Grand Canyon tourist site is now. So the organizer, Claire Hoffman, had begun this project, and I came on a couple of years later. But the project is to teach young people on the Hopi and Navajo reservations, and also the Salt River Pima community down in Phoenix, to make classical music, to work with classical instruments. And so I'm only at these schools for about a week. There's not enough time to really work with these young people. That's about as much as the school is going to let me in there, not being full-time. But also, these schools don't have music programs. A couple of them do, and the reason why is because they have a really good football team or basketball team, so they need a marching band. So then they say, okay, we need a band teacher. And so about half the schools, the kids can read notes, the other half they don't. That's not to say in those schools the kids don't play guitar. It's like, a lot of these kids are metalheads, heavy metal, big out there. So I can relate, you know, to those ones too. But we only have a week, and I teach them as much as I can about music notation and about the strings and the effects that they can do on the strings. And even if they just learn middle C and a whole note, then they'll write a piece just for that. But they'll make different sounds with just that limited pitch and rhythm language. And so we get about 30 young people a year doing this program. And then every Labor Day weekend, we put on a big concert at the Grand Canyon Music Festival, presenting these new works for string quartet. Also, we've had this quartet. For a long time, it was a quartet, Ethel Quartet, out of New York City, was our quartet in residence. And now we work with a quartet called Catalyst Quartet. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting ideas that run through the young people's minds. In fact, I would say this piece, Horse Notations Tonight, came about in some way. I mean, it came from a few different angles, but one of them I was just thinking the other day that came from a young kid just trying to ask how he could transcribe the neighing of a horse. And this kid hadn't really left his small town. He also, at the border of the town he lives in, there was a sign that said open range, meaning open area. It was like, animals might be crossing the highway. So he named his piece Open Range and wanted to know the range of the instrument. But, so one of these schools, back to your question, is one of these schools, I think it was in Monument Valley, did have a music teacher. This music teacher was coming, he was very young, just out of grad school. He was coming from somewhere out here on the East Coast. He'd never been to the Navajo reservation. He was very enthusiastic about teaching, but knew nothing about Navajo culture. In his curriculum, he had, had acquired these, a lot of kids, when they do band, they play the recorder. He had acquired a bunch of these kind of like plastic 5-hole Native American flutes, New Age kind of thing, and was teaching the kids songs on them. I don't know who made these songs. They were probably very stereotypical, but nonetheless, that was what the young people had, the only instrument they had to learn on. And so I was in the back room getting ready for the students that I was going to meet with, and heard all of these. I heard a classroom of 20 kids being forced to play the very rigid pentatonic scale on a plastic flute, and tried to line that up and play in tune together, and it was never going to happen. And to me, that became a symbol of a lot of things, of forced assimilation, of resistance, of creating a new kind of music, of the evolution of tradition, and also this pan-Indianism, I think, that we're sometimes find ourselves in as Native artists. And so yeah, that's like a 2-minute track. I try to record it, quietly from the corner, and that didn't think too much about it.
Since you brought up horse notations, I was wondering just how either the lithograph or the composition sort of came to be. Did the two sort of visual and sonic work in tandem? What was the impetus?
In 2019, or maybe it was 2018, I was invited by the Oregon East Symphony to collaborate with them. They wanted to commission a new work. That ensemble and organization is based out of Pendleton, Oregon, which borders with the Umatilla Indian Reservation. On the Umatilla Indian Reservation is a fantastic printmaking studio, Crow's Shadow, that was founded by an artist from that community. His name's James Lavador. And so both of them collaborated, which was beautiful to think of, just, combining resources and bringing me out. I don't know anything about printmaking though, so I was scared. I could do the music half, but I wanted to think, about what people were interested out there. They do a lot of horse stuff out there. I'm mixed up in horses a little bit. My wife here has 3 horses. I was researching old articles about horses and thinking, I want to do something about that. And I came upon this Popular Science article. Popular Science magazine, I guess, has been around since 1870 something. In 1874, there was this article called Paces of the Horse. And it's about this guy, Professor Murray, who had tried to transcribe the different trots and gallops and canters of horses. And so that's what you see in this print. And so he had invented some kind of pneumatic device, sticking them on the joints and the hooves, and just kind of making marks with I don't know how he got a treadmill, or I don't know. I don't know the whole thing about it. It's Googleable if you want to read the larger PDF. But I thought that the markings were very interesting, and it kind of could be an extension of imprecision, of something like rhythm. I think in a lot of my scores and a lot of music, it tries to resist precision. I'm not too interested in that. I like looseness in this music. And so thinking that there could be fluctuations or freedom to interpret these different, ways that the graph is trying to replicate these trots could be transferred to something like notation for drumming. And some of these other arcs you see are more information about how high the leg goes and how much pressure the hoof has when it touches the ground. And so applying those to the strings, using my knowledge of how to write for strings from the Kneecap project. And the flute, might be back to this story about the kids too. Like, there's got to be some ways to still use the flute as an instrument to reference this history of the horse, to reference native songs, singing, but not, because that has already been tainted by, like I said, New Age music. But still, it's still an instrument. The classical chamber flute is something that I love to write for. So, I thought it was the best instrument to include with the strings.
So maybe just one more question, Raven, since you set up so nicely, us being able to listen to the composition. And when I think of printmaking, especially you said you'd never done printmaking before, which you could have fooled me from looking at the print. Collaboration is so crucial to the process of printmaking. An artist coming in, working with, I think it's Judith Bauman out at Crow Shadow. But collaboration is just a through line of, it seems like just about everything you do, from Postcommodity to the work you've done with Candace to Kneecap to inviting audience participation. And so I've just been struck. It seems like it's more than a process. It seems almost like a worldview, almost like a way of seeing the world. And I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind commenting on collaboration and what it means to you as part of your practice.
I think surely musicians in the room understand that that's how we get things done. We end up in ensembles and bands. Collaboration is absolutely necessary for what we do. So I think comes from starting with that, with that background. But also, I think for me, it's also this feedback loop. And feedback is a theme and a medium and a tactic and a lot of my other music. But thinking about that in terms of just what gets learned in these processes and between collaborators, between students, between audience. And it's not so much audience participation, but rather maybe finding ways that non-musicians can play music, for instance, bringing different people in to create sounds together. Again, that's not a harmony thing. I'm not talking about, teach all the world to sing or whatever, but just including people that you wouldn't expect making sound to make sound, and working with those results or steering those results into a music that couldn't be made otherwise. And so that's my interest. I like working on a large scale musically too, when I can. And so, I mean, I don't mean necessarily like an orchestra or anything like that, but yeah, like there's a piece Drum Grid, which has up to 50 drummers or more to play music together. And in some kind of coordination where they're each responding to another drummer who's playing before them. So this kind of maybe feedback loop of learning from each other in real time becomes the composition. And then, yeah, teaching too. I like to work with people who I maybe have mentored and bring them into a larger collaboration. And so with Kneecap, we're having students who are now my co-composing teachers in that project.
Well, Drum Grid, I was thinking that could have been a pandemic project because it's performed outside, right? All the drummers are socially distanced, so you might have to bring that back. But because it's been a while, maybe for some of us, certainly for me, and I've missed live music so much. So this is such an honor to have you here, Raven, and to have the musicians here to perform horse notations. Maybe just a reminder to silence your cell phones. In case you forgot that that's part of live music. So I think Raven and I will turn the floor over to the musicians. There'll just be a little stage management as we get the stands out and the seats and so on. But then Raven and I will come back after the composition to take questions from all of you. So thanks very much and enjoy the composition. Thank you to the incredible musicians. That was incredible, incredible. Wow. Oh, really miss live music. Just amazing. I have to give also a shout out to Christine Howlett, chair of the music department. This is Christine's program as much as anybody's. Thank you so much. And how about Raven Chacon? So I think we have time for some questions. Questions for Raven, questions for the musicians. We'll just sort of open it up. And I will repeat your question so we can all hear it, but maybe we'll start here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you all so much. It was a real experience. I'm looking at the print. I'm watching the musicians, and they're moving their music around. I'm seeing the music sheet from a distance. And I'm seeing replications of that same markings. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I'll just repeat so you all can hear the idea of the markings, what it means to experience this piece with the musicians here, with the lithograph, the movement, and being able to see the graphic notations on the stand. So asking Raven to comment on that.
So yeah, as I was explaining earlier in the pre-talk, that these there was an idea to use some of these notations, these transcriptions from Professor Mari in the Popular Science article, and use these as notations for the drum. So they're mostly used throughout the piece as the. So as the notation that is being used for the drums, there's almost no notes that are written for the drum. So and everybody follows the drum, or drummers. Sometimes there's two in this piece. Occasionally, some of the other instruments will also have the same graphic, and they're also to replicate what the drum is doing. And to explain again, some of these arcs are also used inside of the score as gestures for bowing or pressure of bow. And so I kind of put some of these notations together into this formation of this lithograph to make my own kind of sheet to work from that then ended up becoming music notation. I just remember there's some other translation in this. There was, these letters here had some different meaning in the original article. There was abbreviations for, front left, front right, anterior left, anterior right, hooves. And I had decided, I had asked some of the people from Umatilla community how that was translated in Sauhapten, which is the language that's spoken out there. So those are actually abbreviations of the Sauhapten words for front and left and rear and so forth. I don't know how to say those, so don't ask. But that was another part. I was thinking about the in translation part of this. And that's it. Yeah, that sounds
great. Other questions? Tim.
So in the part of the piece where the flautist gets up and moves clockwise to the 4 music stands, and I was thinking a little bit of cardinal points, 4 directions. How much of that is notated in the score versus how much of the choreography is improvised by the musician?
So I'll just repeat the question so you can hear it. How much of the movements of the flautist is recorded in the notation and how much of it is improvised?
I love improvisation. I consider myself an improviser, but in the chamber music, I don't really. A lot of it's pretty specific. What's intended, and so after this, these will probably stay up if you want to take a look at the notations of that third movement. There's a box and a little dot in the corner of the box depending on the measure number. And so that's the position of where she would walk to in this circle. And when she arrives at those points, then they move on to the next measure of music. And so it's this kind of cycling that's determined by where the flute ends up in that cycle. But it's all pretty specific. I think the only thing that's kind of free for interpretation is mostly what the percussionist is doing. And some flexibility there in interpreting those gates. And there's some other graphics for some of the scraping sounds and some of the other things that aren't pitched. Those are kind of more graphic notation. But for the most part, everything's pretty precise there, at least in terms of what I want. And then there's an instruction page that tells all this kind of stuff.
Other questions? Yeah.
The word that you used in the beginning of your talk, I don't remember the word, but you said it's best translated as beauty.
Hojo.
Hojo. Is that referring to a material thing or process, or also like a spiritual part of spiritual practice?
I think it's spiritual, completely spiritual, and a phrase that's heard a lot is as a means to live your life, like walking in beauty, is a term that's always said. Again, though, that's a word that doesn't really have a translation, I think, and so beauty is the English word that got applied to it. But I'd say it's absolutely spiritual, and a word that has meaning in a lot of different ways, a lot of different ways of living, and can be applied to moments as well. And that's the reason I use it to describe what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
I was wondering, since you use these data quite directly on piece of music, and sometimes the data seem a bit fixed from the way it's collected, do you see the piece as a projection of science or nature?
That's a good question.
I'll repeat the question in case you didn't hear it. I'm not sure I could put it nearly as well, but is this about science or nature?
It was part of it is to think about I thought it was funny that he tried to notate that, if there was futility in that, if there was an attempt to get some kind of accuracy. I also appreciated the graphic side of that. It could have just been maybe numbers or something, but there was drawing involved. There was mark making involved. But for me, I guess it was thinking too, just in some ways, I think this piece is not just about the horse. It's about the automobile, or it's about the airplane, or it's about whatever technology was trying to be measured with other tools, other technology. These air pumps. If you look at the PDF, it's funny too, because there's a drawing of a horse with all these tubes and things. But I think about that too. The last time this piece was performed, a car alarm went off in the parking lot during the third movement. And a friend of mine thought it was planned. He's another composer. He said, "Oh yeah, it's about the automobile replacing the horse." I said, "No, that wasn't intended. We're going to do it again at Vassar in a couple weeks." But I appreciate your question. It was thinking about that, trying to rein in these animals, and to the point of analyzing how they move.
That's what happens when you make experimental music. Anything that happens, it can become a part of the piece. Any other questions? Yeah.
When you finish the piece, are you ever tempted to go back and meddle with it, or is it done?
There's always revisions after the first time, because I just don't know what I'm doing sometimes, and that's why it's experimental music. It's like it's a test. It's a trial and error, and if I'm fortunate enough to be able to work with musicians over like weeks while I'm still finishing it up, then I don't usually have to do that. But no, I mean small tweaks just for clarity, but other than that, I don't really change anything.
I have just two questions really. Number one is, it seems the Oregon Symphony commissioned this, so was it done by a much larger ensemble? That's one question. And the second question is just in reference to Frank, my buddy Frank. Like, it seemed like the percussion notation from my quick look ahead is maybe the least specific. And so when it was done in Oregon, did the drums sound quite different or similar? Did you work with Frank? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, same size of ensemble. It's optional that there could be two drummers. But the last few times, this is only the third time this has been performed. When they did it in Oregon, there were two drummers. Maybe I should explain that was another reason for using graphics as the drum notation was a bit about what I was speaking about earlier, in that to include people who didn't read music notes. So that was performed by a Umatilla drummer he doesn't read music notation, but he's a phenomenal musician. That was to include him into the ensemble. And but no, it's the same configuration. That doesn't change. There's ways to interpret the notation for maybe using two drums or two sets of sticks. There's different tactics. I know the drummer who did it a few weeks ago in Albuquerque had a hand drum and had two different kinds of sticks that she was using. Maybe Frank wants to say something about.
Yeah, Frank, you want to?
Not quite sure what to say about it. We did try to connect. I was actually overseas at the time, and unfortunately we didn't really get to connect about that. But reading after Raven actually sent me a few videos of horses and different gaits of what their steps were and what the sounds were, so I could use that kind of as a reference to how these little things are going to be played. And it's like the feet, hooves hitting, like you said. So I could kind of figure out some kind of gait for this part. Maybe it's faster trot. Maybe I want to play something faster, like the triplet section. It's kind of like that. Does that help your figure?
Other questions, Betsy?
You were able to experience like the music and the lithograph today at the same time, but obviously can exist separately. How did the process of making the lithograph and the satisfaction that you got out of finishing that compare to the satisfaction or like the frustration of making and finishing the composition?
Oh, so I'll try and paraphrase that excellent question, Betsy. But yeah, just comparing the experience of making the lithograph to the experience of composing the music and hearing it performed. Different kinds of satisfaction, related.
They were concurrent practices. So I went out there for a residency at Crow's Shadow. So again, yeah, I encourage you to look at their website. There's a lot of good work that gets made, and not everybody who does one of these residencies is a printmaker. But their invitation to have me there for, I think I was there for 3 weeks. I was finishing this up, but at the same time, then I'd work on this a little bit. Then I'd go in the studio and draw and learn about how to take the drawing and put it into the different processes to become the print. So that half of it, it was like in the morning, I was like, oh, I got to work on the score. And then in the afternoon, I got to have, some fun learning how this process works. So I think there was, to answer your question, I think there was some freedom on my end. I was feeling the need that this had to be the score, but, working with the graphics, redrawing elements of it, and just having the freedom that this was a score, this was not the score, I think for me personally was a satisfying part of the project. Because all of the information for the score is this, and this can exist as something else that still references what the music half of it is.
Oh, so I was back here in the mask, surgical mask.
During the performance, I became very aware of the music that existed in the space, in tandem with the music that they were playing. And I was curious, what hopes do you have for your music when it enters a space?
I'll just repeat quickly for anyone who couldn't hear it over here. What hopes does Raven have for his music when it's in a new space?
I hope nobody messes up. I don't know. No, I'm just, you know, you could go home and listen to a recording. Any of us could do that. But there's, like John was saying, just to be in the presence of live music, to me is special. That's why I continue to write in this medium, and why I like to perform as well. You know, make work as a performer is because of my love of whatever, the sound molecules in the room bouncing from the instrument straight to you. And in this case, there's not even amplification, right? That's why these instruments are amazing, because I don't think they can get any better. I think they've evolved to this point through, you know, wherever, Africa, Asia, through the classical tradition into this hall, and make these sounds that you hear today. So for me, then you're right. Then I guess the space contributes to that, or maybe could even hinder that, I suppose. But it becomes another part of the composition as well, and the acoustics of the space. But the audience too. I mean, it's I value the presence of people sitting together to also have a listening experience. To me, that's a big part of it, and why I do it.
An accidental follow-up to that. Do you ever have your music performed outdoors? Because that also involves chance operation, occasionally in reference the sound of the horn. And with this piece, ever in proximity to horses?
Is the music performed outdoors or in proximity to horses?
Next time, yeah, let's do that.
You're all up for it, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. I love making music outdoors. I have pieces that can only be done outdoors. I have a series of scores called American Ledger, and they don't exist as paper scores. They exist as billboards, as walls, as flags, and the ensemble all looks at the same flag or the same wall. And it's a way to just kind of bring these situations out into the public, so that somebody might encounter the score on the wall and then go walk by another day and somebody's performing it. And also, yeah, that the context of where it is, the city, you know, that it's being performed in, what sounds that those contribute to the soundtrack. They're part of the soundtrack that the score is speaking about, the history of that place. So, of course, the cars on the street, the man screaming on the corner is part of that history.
Maybe one or two more questions? Yeah.
I just have a quick question. It might be too personal. It's okay just to say, you know, don't let the answer. So it was a process-oriented question. And just, you said, you know, you like to keep things loose. You know, I can feel that. I'm just kind of abstractly investigating how loose is too loose, and there seems like there's an essential continuity in what you do, and that may never stop. Like you may always be composing, you know, as you're living. And I'm wondering how sleep for you comes into play with your composing and with your works.
A question about sleep, the continuity between living and composing.
That's a good question. Yeah, that's not personal. I'm happy to try to figure that one out. I used to not sleep at all. I used to sleep like 3 hours and then go work for like 5 hours, and then sleep another 3 hours, then work 5 hours, like never ending. And I actually used to tour a lot, like travel around and drive, and that disrupted sleep, and airplanes do that as well. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, I used to be able to compose on the airplane, or like even do emails on the airplane, but I can't do that anymore for some reason. I don't know what changed. I used to be able to compose in the car. Not while driving, but like be like in a passenger, and my friend was driving or something. But yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I don't know. You're right. I don't know why I should answer that here, but I really appreciate that question, because I think about that, and my friends and family try to gauge: are you sleeping enough? And when do you get time to do all this stuff? But I think for any artist, it's important to try to self-reflect and think about that. Yeah.
Maybe one more question? Yeah.
Do you have a favorite moment or sound in the piece?
Does Raven have a favorite moment or sound in the piece?
Yeah, there's a part. It's funny too. I don't even know where it is. I think it's maybe the fourth movement. The musicians maybe should answer this, but this is not necessarily a programmatic piece. I mean, I'm not saying this is when the horse wakes up in the morning, this is when the horse does this is the horse in the round pen. It's nothing like that. It's thinking about these different paces, but there's a part everybody says, is that the horse sleeping? And it's like a scrape on the bow or something, and I think that might be today is my favorite part when I think about it. But I don't know, maybe any of the musicians have a moment that they liked hearing or performing, or I don't know.
Anyone want to comment?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
I can just project. The movement where the flute or the marcher walks around, the very end of it is kind of my favorite moment. When it's their whistle tone, which is very soft, how she ends it all by herself. But I don't know, there's something very grounding about listening to that. And then all of a sudden, realize where I am in a very, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but out-of-body experience.
Yeah. Well, on that note, hopefully we're all grounded and feeling in our bodies. Thanks, Raven. One more round of applause, please, for the incredible musicians. And one more round of applause for Raven Chacon, please. You have 4 more days to see the Whitney Biennial, see Raven's work in it, and in translations up till September 18th. So with that, thank you all for being here, and have a great night. Really appreciate your time.